Hi everyone and welcome back to this. Let me just tidy up and then I'll tell you what we're doing. Welcome back to Nelly's Nerd Cave. Now this is better, it's a little bit tidier. I know it doesn't particularly look tidy, but it's going to get much tidier as we go through this. Now I've tidied up, let's tell you what's been going on for the past few months now. And I've kind of been trying to do some upgrades to my gear, and you know where I'm like, I like to put things like unboxings and what I've bought and what they're like, etc. The last one was about the light that's at the side of me that's shining up there, which you can see just here. I've always wanted a camera slider, and I kind of looked through things and I thought, I'm a budget channel, let's see what we can do here. Because this is something that can be quite expensive, but I didn't realise that having really bad eyesight and kind of big fingers and hammers for hands was going to prevent me from making these kinds of things without breaking a lot of stuff in the process. So when I kind of looked into these camera sliders on places like Amazon, photography and filmmaking websites, that you're looking at a motorised camera slider starting anywhere from £300 all the way up to thousands and thousands, depending on what you want that thing to do. I just want it to go backwards and forwards and be able to stay on a target and move side to side, just so that it makes some of these things look nice. I'm wanting to make it, for me, a little bit more affordable. It's going to move so that I can have some nice smooth B-roll shots of things like graphics cards, motherboards, RAM, etc, etc. And it looks a bit more professional than the shakiness that I already have at the moment. So what I did is I went online, and it didn't take me long to find some. Now I did manage to find one and I did build it, but it did take me an awful lot longer than the one that I finally decided upon. And again, that's because of my poor eyesight, etc. I first started with this particular blog that you'll see on screen from Sasa Karanovic. I hope I've pronounced your name right. On there they suggested that I use a 2020 aluminium extrusion. So what I did is I bought this wonderful thing, 80 centimeters, 800 millimeters, or 31.5 inches for my American friends out there. And what they suggested is that I used bits from 3D printers to be able to get these bits and pieces sorted, etc. But on that blog, they also had 3D print files for things like the carriage, etc. And as you've seen in one of my previous videos, I bought myself a 3D printer. So I thought, perfect opportunity to have a play with things and make some bits and pieces myself. So what I did is I downloaded all those particular files and I printed just the parts for the carriage to start with. So here's the carriage. You can see that I've already built this, and it suggested that I purchased some bits and pieces from Amazon. So a couple of bits and pieces is underneath this pulley here. There is some, what are they called again? They are called, you know what, I can't even remember what these are. But they are some kind of bearing, and it kind of, you need one, and it's got weird names. So there were like a 51104, and it's 35 millimeters wide, and it has a 20mm hole, and that sits underneath the pulley bit underneath here that makes it spin. Then to come on the other side, you needed what was called an F816M, which is a 16mm bearing with an 8mm hole, and these are helped to make it spin round and move freely and easily. Now, like I say, this is pre-assembled because the screw down the middle here, when I was testing this, when the motor was spinning it round backwards and forwards, it would loosen the nut down the middle, and it would unfortunately bind and then not work. So I had to use Loctite so that I could then basically glue it all together so that it all functions correctly and doesn't come undone. So once it's together for those people who've used Loctite before. I then purchased from Amazon a pack of 12 of these V-shaped pulley wheels that are on the bottom. These actually fit into the extrusion itself, so you can plonk it on the extrusion and it glides across nice and smoothly. These were $7.99 for 12 of them. I only really needed 4. 66 pence each isn't too bad, I suppose. Basically, I used some nuts and bolts that I already had with some locking nuts to be able to mount these wheels. The next thing I did is, from an old 3D printer, I salvaged a couple of NEMA 17 motors. And again, like I say, these were kind of reclaimed. As part of these motors, they actually had the belt pulleys on the top as well, and these are 20-tooth belt pulleys. And this helped a lot because it saved a bit of money because I already had them. But I had to purchase a 200mm closed loop belt, which you can see here. But unfortunately, that was a little bit too tight, and it pulled the middle central pulley, this big one here, because it was 3D printed, even with the bearings, pulled it so hard that it actually bound on the carriage plastic itself. So I opted to source and find a 210mm one instead to fit this absolutely spot on and perfectly. And this now doesn't bind. It's a little bit looser, but it means that it's not going to bind, it's not going to faff. So it's perfect for what I need. This will sit on the bar like I've said, and with that, the blog also showed that you could build one of these quite easily. The biggest problem I found with this particular blog was that the circuit was just the circuit board. You literally paid, or you sent off some Gerber file or something like that to be able to get your circuit boards. I didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do was I wanted to get it on a breadboard so that I could test all the circuit first before going out and buying circuit boards. I tried to look at the pictures and the file that they got and try to kind of backwards engineer it so that I could make it work. It never did. So I had to bite the bullet and pay for some circuit boards. And I went to the popular place of JLC PCB. This is not a sponsored video, by the way. I purchased all these things myself. Once I'd uploaded the file and I'd stumbled around the website quite a lot because I'd never used it before, I waited the obligatory 2 weeks, which was actually 3 weeks, and I waited for them to arrive. When they did, I didn't realise how small surface mount components are. And with my eyesight being very, very poor, I really struggled getting these surface mount components onto the board. I managed it, the board worked. And what I did is I used my wonderful magnifiers and went into mad scientist mood and used my magnifiers to be able to make all this work. Got it all soldered together, and the next thing up was to actually mount the ESP32 board, which is what it used. Now, I had a few of these lying around anyway from WLED projects that I've got, and followed the instructions on the blog. And programming is not something I am born to do at all. I'm not a programmer. I struggled a lot. And even though the instructions were quite clear, I couldn't make it work. It wouldn't upload, and then when it did upload it had errors, and then I spoke to loads of different people and I absolutely lost the will to live. So what I decided to do is give up for a few days and come back with fresh eyes. And I spent a lot of time looking at different tutorials and videos. I spoke to a few people who were programmers, and eventually I managed to get it uploaded and working, I think. It took me ages to get this code uploaded, and it felt absolutely wonderful to get this functioning. Once functional, It was brilliant. It had a wonderful little web page. You went to an IP address and you went to a web page, and it allowed me to be able to lock and unlock the motors so that they move freely, or they were electrically charged so that they were ready to go. But nothing else actually worked. Nothing at all. The motors wouldn't spin, even though the program was saying it was doing it. Nothing would work. And it seemed as though electrically it wasn't functioning at all. It was doing very bare minimum, and I absolutely lost it because programming doesn't come to me. So I went back to the drawing board, and what I did is I had another look around the internet for some other bits and pieces, and I finally landed upon this particular website of DIYlife.com. Still got the carriage, still using the carriage. Now, on DIY.life.com, I saw an article by Michael Clements, and he kept it dead simple. Like I say, using the carriage, using the same extrusion, and a few other bits and pieces that I thought were better. Now, his particular article had wonderful pictures of a breadboard and the circuit made on the breadboard, which I followed to the picture on the screen. Bought the relevant board that I needed because it was no longer an ESP32. It's an Arduino Pro Mini. And what I did is I programmed it, uploaded the code, which was dead simple because it was just one piece of code and it was fabulous. I uploaded it, tested it on the breadboard, and it actually worked, which it was so exhilarating to make it function. Now, one of the things I did manage to do is the OLED screen. I was holding it with my left hand like this, and I had an operation to repair a tendon on my thumb, and I don't really have feeling in my thumb and finger, so when I grabbed it like this, I pushed too hard on this corner and split the screen down the middle. So that's going in the bin. Fortunately, it came as a pair, so I got a second one, and I was a little bit more careful with it this time, and it worked, which was fabulous. So I plugged everything in, it worked fine, got a wonderful thing on the screen with a menu, which I'll show you shortly, and it worked, and it was awesome. So on there he also had some files to send to JLC PCB, got some more PCBs, these wonderful purple ones, and I soldered them up, which you can see here.
Any ideas?
And now it's all soldered up, this is the circuit board ready to go. A few little changes. So they said you could use a jumper on here, but there was also a suggestion a bit further down in the article that you could use a switch. Now what this does is it energizes the NEMA 17 motors, and what it then does is you can de-energize them so you can move them a little bit more freely. So now we've got the board. It absolutely works fine. I've tested this a few times, still scratching my head as to how I actually managed it. So even though I find coding very difficult, something must have gone in because this works. Yay. But what I also did is I then went on and I found some files on things like printing feet. So I printed some feet out. I made these based on some things that I had seen, and I made some feet for the actual thing. They're not the nicest looking feet on the planet. They could be a little bit rounder rather than this weird squareness. I don't know if you can see that, but they're very square, but so they could be a bit rounder. But it's for me to play with, so it doesn't really make any difference. I deviated slightly from some of the actual blog because the NEMA 17 motor bracket that's supposed to go on the end here was 3D printed, and there was a lot of comments on the site saying that once the NEMA motors got warm, it would melt the plastic and it would warp slightly. So I decided, do you know what, I'm going to buy an aluminium one. So I did. So here's the aluminium one. You take this and you screw it all together, and hopefully, he says, leaving bits and pieces, that should. So that is where your motor now goes. Nice and simple. For the other side, so for this end, I purchased this pulley because again they said that yes, you could 3D print this, but again when the 3D printed it, they found that it warped and it bent up, so it slackened off the belt. So I bought an aluminium one again with some of this extrusion all ready to go, and as you can see I've got the belt already on because from testing this actually functioned, so I thought keep it on, what the hell. Again, this one's relatively easy and straightforward to put on. You pop it on, make sure that it's not in the wrong place because that does happen as well. So that's the basics of this done. So now what we need to do, if this actually works, is need to thread. See if this fits on. Ooh, just. So this is me not really putting it together properly. So I'll unscrew this side. And what I'll do is, so you need to make sure that you've got this bit goes in a little gap here. So you basically put that in and then you spread that out over these 2 feet so that it spreads out. But first you need to make sure that it goes on in the right place. Come on. There we go. So that goes like that, and now I can actually put on this bracket back on. Like so. And I will put my feet on because they're always useful. And then you'll find that it stands up quite nicely. Now I hear you all cry, what about this end? Which doesn't work because Neil hasn't put this on properly.
A few moments later.
Well, right, there we go. Hopefully that's done it. So now what we need to do is We now need to attach this NEMA 17. I'm going to run it so that the cables run that way, and we pop that through there, and I have 4 M3 by 6mm screws. Again, everything falling apart. And that's the NEMA 17. Added to the mix. The last thing I need to do with this end is get the pulley. Again, this is a 20-tooth pulley, and make sure that I can pop it on like so. He says, not being able to use the correct sized one. I think it's this one. Cool. Right, so you'll notice that there's quite a bit of slack here. This is where this end comes in. We tighten this end and it actually tightens up the belt really nicely. So then everything then should move nice and smoothly, which it does. Fabulous. You can adjust the belt tension, which is nice. And this is the basics of the actual slider itself. What I also did is I designed some of these, and these actually fit in the channel of this, and I thought, what perfect way to tidy this all up than to have the wire go into the underneath and then clip in nicely. Be really good to be able to do that and have it neat and tidy all along the bottom. There you go. So you only see a little bit of cable now rather than a mess. This one I've already pre-wrapped so that it's again nice and it will come to the middle, so I should be able to get both directions nicely with plenty of slack. I also printed a couple of these out, and these are camera tripod mounts, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few somewhere later on, but I'm not going to do that now. So the main track and slider is done. Next up, yes, I've got 2 of these because there's a reason, is a box to actually mount the circuit board. Now the circuit board and the box that I found, once I printed it out, this one you'll notice that there are 2 with 2 different angles on. Hopefully you can see those there. He says one's got an angle and one hasn't. The one without an angle, when you put it on the slider, the NEMA 17 motor hits it, so it won't move. Whereas with an angled edge, it moves perfectly along and it will fine. So printed one out with an angled edge so that then I can mount everything. Now this is going to be a bit tricky, so we have to mount the board, and then I have to find screws, which I've got here. He says dropping them into the bottom of the box. No, come here. Why is it not working? Let's use one of these. Maybe this will be a bit more magnetic. There we go. So we'll use this one to get it started. And in the bottom of this box is some little holes, and we can just screw these screws in like so. So these are just normal PC screws. Again, being in the PC industry, I have millions of these things, so why wouldn't I use them? And the cheapest chips, and don't cost anything really to me, so that's how I saved a bit more money there. There we go. And then what I need to do is I need to bend this so that the switch goes out of a hole in the side of the box. There we go. like so. And you'll see in a minute that all this should hopefully fit together. Fantastic. Let's get it tightened up. What I'm also going to do is I'm also going to get my label printer, print a little label on so I know which one's which. And this one is off and then on, fab. So I push that down like so, so that I can get in. There we go, great. Next thing, lid. Lid full of ventilation. Got a nice place to slide in the little screen. Hopefully I don't smash it again with my big fat stupid fingers that don't seem to work for anything other than typing. Pop this like so. And once I screwed the lid on, that is the box complete. Obviously I've missed one thing, and that is putting these wires through this hole here so that I can mount everything up. But I'm going to do that off camera in a minute because it's fiddly. So I'll see you shortly.
3 hours later.
Alright, welcome back. So now I've got that all mounted. I've put all the cables through the back and finished the whole thing off. And whilst off camera, I also decided in my ultimate wisdom that I was going to put end stop switches on, which seemed to work really well and was really simple to add. So now this is complete, all I basically have to do is use this wonderful little screen down here to be able to follow the menu and be able to make it work. So for example, I can make this pan and move across. Let me just put a quick one on, and you just press it, it counts down to 3, and then it should just move, which is great. There we go. So working absolutely fine. You can make it rotate, you can make it track an object, and you can make it so that you can pan and rotate at the same time, and it's really cool. This whole thing, if we take into account the many mistakes that I made, which I hope everybody out there watching this don't make now you've seen and heard me do these mistakes, it's probably cost £200. I know at the beginning of the episode I kind of said that some of these camera sliders are about £300 starting price. Why not just go that extra mile, Neil, and spend an extra £100 and just buy one? I don't think it would have been as enjoyable. I have enjoyed building this, even though I've been banging my head on a wall for the programming code for some of these things. I think this has been super rewarding. It's absolutely fantastic. And what you're going to see up next is you are going to see some B-roll footage of what this thing is actually capable of doing. I'm only going to keep it very basic, just looking at some of the pan and rotate options, and I've just done a few graphics cards and a motherboard to be able to make sure that everything works. And here you go. And now you've seen that working and you've seen this fully functioning, I have a fantastic camera slider with end stops so that it makes it nice and easy and it doesn't disappear off the end of the actual rail itself. To help make my videos a bit more interesting, this is what I'm going to be using for some of my B-roll shots, and hopefully this is going to make things a little better and easier, and I'm going to use it for all sorts, because I have tried this. I can use this in the vertical position as well and on an angle, and it just makes things a bit more interesting as far as B-roll is concerned. So if you think that you can make one of these, by all means go ahead. Please don't make the mistakes I've made. I've learned a hell of a lot from doing this, such as electronic components can be very, 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 very fragile, and I have stupidly horrible hands that don't seem to grab things gently at all, so I've broken quite a few things. When I've been soldering, making sure that I'm able to see, you know, I have to wear on top of my glasses 3 times zoom lenses on top, and this helped considerably. But make sure you've got the correct soldering equipment. I had to buy a new soldering iron because mine just wasn't fit enough, because it was like 10 or 12 years old. So I bought a brand new one, and that one worked perfectly. Make sure all your solder joints are soldered correctly with the correct heat, and everything should be hunky-dory and working just as good as this is. Now, if you like what you've seen here and you've enjoyed what I've done and you've gone about and learnt something, please like and subscribe and hit the thumbs up button to make sure that you get all the notifications of my videos. I do go live from time to time. I don't make a habit of it, but I do go live when I'm playing games. And until next time, I'll see you later.